Hey YouTube. So, um, let me just tell you about this weather. I'm sitting in a room that has 5 windows in it. The windows are 3 foot by 5 foot. And the light you see is all the light we're getting, and it's, I don't even know what time it is. I think it's, 3 o'clock. So it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And, I just can't figure out this weather. It's crazy. So they're calling for, let me just tell you, this is north central Pennsylvania. They are calling for 1 inch of snow tonight as a dusting, and then a dusting of snow on Saturday night. And I just have to tell you that I'm so not used to this kind of snow weather here. All the years we've lived here, we have either gotten, a foot of snow at least once during the winter. One year it was especially a brutal storm. In 1 week we got 42 inches of snow. So we got, like 20 inches one day and 22 inches 2 days later. That's the kind of snow we've been getting. I mean, when I used to come up here to visit before we moved here, and that wasn't that many years, maybe 1 or 2 years, I used to have to shovel and shovel and shovel to be able to get my car or my truck down into the driveway. And at one point we could just get the car off the road up there so people could get by if they had to. And that was as far as we shoveled, and then we came down and I can remember like I'm touching the roof because of how high the snow was. So I don't get this. Normally we get stuff that's like in the wintertime, since we've been here, normally what it does is we'll get a foot or so of snow, 18 inches of snow, and then we'll get a lot of this every night, a dusting of snow. So the every night dusting of snow is it's not important to us. It doesn't seem like anything that's really going to be interesting. So anyway, that's what the weather is, and just thought you'd like to know that. Hey guys, so anyway, what I figured I'd talk about, I don't want to talk about just the weather. I'm just saying that when I was talking about the weather before, for some reason it seems to Sally and me, or Sally and I, that every time the barometric pressure goes up, we see our energy level seems to go down. She's in there trying to bake more cookies for somebody's birthday, and I got done with my chores, so I came in the house. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, we talked about when do kids grow up. I wanted to talk a little bit about discipline in kids. And not so much what I did with my kids or didn't do, but I want to talk about what was done with me. So let me just say this to you. From the time that I was, from as far back as I can remember, they say some kids can remember less than 3 years old, whatever. I don't know about that, but I'm going to call it less than 6 years old. So before I started kindergarten, man, I got a lot of lickings. That's the only thing I remember when I was a kid, was getting a licking. And my dad worked full time, so I remember him giving me most of the lickings. So, there couldn't have been that many. So you're looking at like 1 a week at least. So the point is, though, as a little kid, up until the time I was, I don't know, probably 12 years old, my mom pretty much handled whatever issues I had. So in other words, if I gave her grief or something, she didn't really go to my dad and say, hey, beat him up. She didn't do that. My mom would handle it herself. My mom had a pretty good temper on her, so she could, calm you down, especially when I was, younger than 10 years old. But my point here is, younger than 6, my parents did not put up with a lot of nonsense. I mean, please, thank you, yes, no, take your shoes off when you come in the house, put your shoes on when you go back out. This is the way things were done, and this is the way we did them, and whatever my mom wanted, that's what had to be done. When I was real young like that, I didn't do a whole lot of work around the house. My mom would, just tell us things to do. And as far as discipline goes, it would be a matter of go up to your bedroom for a little bit. Usually it was never very long. Or, sit down and just be quiet. Just sit there and don't say a word. And I'd have to sit. There was no watching TV or nothing at that point. But my dad was not like that. With my dad, when I was real young, if I would act up, it was a spank. Come here. He'd say, come here. And then he'd tell me, you are not supposed to do what you're doing, whatever it was. And then he'd hit me on the rear end a couple of times, maybe 3 times, and that would be it. To me, I don't even remember the spanking pain. What I remember is just making him feel bad, hurt me more than, the actual spanking did. So, because I didn't see him that much, he was always working. So I only got to see him on weekends, and my mom wanted to see him. So, and they kept that between the two of them. Don't get me wrong, my dad, when I was real little, didn't spend a lot of time with me. After I got to a certain age, he did, when I was able to start helping him. But, that's the way things were when I was young. So, we were taught to say please, to say thank you, when to open the door, when not to open the door, all the little things that kids would get taught. And they were enforced, like, I can remember one time, we lived in a house when I was a real little kid that was right next to my grandparents. And I gotta tell you, if you ever have a life to live and you can live next to a grandparent, that should be one of the better things. Because living next to my grandmother was fantastic. Because I could eat lunch at home or breakfast and still eat lunch and breakfast over there if I was quick enough to get there before my grandpa went anywhere. And she would sit me down in front of the TV and let me watch television or whatever when I was real little. Now I'm talking, like I said, younger than 6 years old. I wasn't in school yet. So I enjoyed that, and being with my grandparents was fantastic. They would holler at you. I'm just going to use that term. They'd holler at you for the same things my mom would holler at me for, but they didn't holler. They would explain it to you. They'd say, well, look, now, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. So don't do that, okay? And I think about it, yeah, I agree with that. And they tell you, if you do this, you're going to get a licking, or if you do that, this is going to happen. But it just so happened, I remember one thing that happened when I was a little kid. I got to just tell you this quick story. We had like there was the basement, first floor, second floor, and attic. So we lived in like a townhouse, but the townhouse was separated from my grandmother's by probably about 5 feet or so. Well, anyway, my mom used to go down the basement to do her laundry. So as a little kid, I don't remember how old I was, but I do remember this freaking stupid door. So anyway, there was a door on the basement to go down the steps, and my mom would go down there. Now, I remember my mom would always be hollering at me, because we used to come in, the way the house was built behind the back of the house, you could come in the back and take your shoes and stuff off and come up the steps, and then you had to lock the door. That's what she would always say, lock the door, lock the door, lock the door. But one day my mom went down in the basement to do her laundry, and I locked the friggin' door. And apparently, after hearing about this for years, I locked the door sometimes in the morning, and my mom never got out of there till 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that when my grandmother came over to see. What happened was I locked that door. I didn't know where my mom was, so I went over to my grandmother's, and I didn't say to her, I don't know where Mommy is, because sometimes my mom would be up in the attic, or she'd be outside, or whatever, and I just didn't bother me. I just went over to my grandmother's house after I locked the basement door. And man, my mom came out of that basement at 2 o'clock when grandmother unlocked the door, and I'm going to tell you that she was so freaking mad she was spitting when she was talking to me. She was hot. She was really, really mad. And that's the first time that is the first time I can remember my mom hitting me. My mom didn't hit us as a rule. She'd punch the table or hit her hand on the table or kick something. She used to have a temper, but she never really hit us, my sister or me. I don't think she ever hit my sister. But when she came out of that basement, she was hot, and I'm telling you, she beat the crap out of me. And I really don't remember the licking. I just remember them telling me about this. So, that's one of the funny parts about being younger than 6. And like I say, we were taught things, do this, do that, do the other thing. And even though my grandmother, it was funny because I do remember my grandmother was there saying to my mom, "You told him to lock the door, you told him to lock the door, that's why he locked the door." And my mom says to him, "I am going to beat the crap out of him, I'm so tired of this." Now, it's not like I was real bad as a kid, but I guess I was troublesome at times. So my grandmother said something like, "Okay, well, I'm going over to the house." And I was sort of like on my own, where it should have been, "Grammy, I'm coming with you," or "Grammy, don't leave me." I didn't think of that. So anyway, that was prior to being 6. It was mostly my dad spanking me, and my mom would do the hollering. Younger than, say, like 16 then. Before I was 16 years old, let's say from the time I got into school, and I started understanding, how to be in school and stuff, and I was getting things happening in school. You get homework, you get report cards, all this stuff. And my mom was one of these where, wait till your dad sees this, wait till your dad sees that. So she used to set me up for, my dad coming home. And he always came home happy, patient, he was glad to be home. And he always sat down and he had his supper. And you would swear nothing was going to happen. But no, after he had supper, and after he sat down and had his cup of coffee, then it was question time. so from the time I was like say roughly in school sometime, it could have been a little later, probably later, but between being in school up till I was 16 years old, so you'd hear stuff. My mom would tell him whatever I did that she didn't care for, and sometimes it was really light stuff. I mean, sometimes I would come in the house from school, she'd have a bag of garbage sitting on the step for me to put into the garbage can, and I wouldn't do it right away. I'd do it after I got changed or whatever. Sometimes that wasn't good enough. Sometimes she wanted it done immediately. So even for little things like that, she would tell him, and he either gave me up until I was 16, he'd only talk to me. He would tell me what the problem is. And he would say, "Do you understand? And I don't want to hear about this again." And I don't think my dad can tell you that once he had a conversation with me, that I did the same thing again. But there were a lot of things that I did do that he didn't like and she didn't like. But they were teaching me, they would talk to me and tell me, "Look, don't do this. This is why you don't do this. Because it causes this, it does that, and the other thing." So, this could teach a young kid then cause and effect, not just cause or you getting out of it. I never got out of nothing. My dad, they would look at me, if somebody said I did something wrong, a neighbor, not my grandmother, but some other neighbor, they believed them. That was it. The teacher said this is what he did wrong. I remember pulling some freaking kid's hair once in school. Yep, he did it. Okay. There was no, "Well, Dad, this is why." Not when I was young like that, because they expected you to act a certain way. So younger than 16, up until the time I got to be 16 years old, I was pretty much, talked to about stuff. If I did something that I shouldn't have done, and I don't even remember, I really can't remember anything up until the 16-year age where I got spankings of any kind or get hit in any way. And my dad sometimes would take his belt off and use his belt to frickin' strap me on the rear end. So, And it's not like he beat the crap out of me. When I say beat the crap out of me, I'm saying he beat you hard enough to make you cry, okay? So sometimes it would take 2 whacks, sometimes 1 whack, sometimes 3 whacks. It all depended on, the age I was and how mad he was. I do remember though, one time I had, like I was sketching, so I was drawing people. And I was drawing stick people, but I was drawing their appendages in the drawings. And my mom looked at this thing and she was like furious that I could do this. So anyway, my dad then, I remember when he came home, I was up in the bedroom because my mom, that's where she sent me after supper. And the way our suppers were, while I was very little, supper never was with Dad because he was always coming home late. So we would eat supper with my mother. My sister and I ate supper with my mother every night at the table. We would help her with dishes and stuff. And not much because my mother was proud of what she had in her home. But anyway, we would help her. And then my dad and her would my dad and her would come home and then she'd sit down and eat again. And my mom wasn't fat either, she was very thin. My mom would sit down with them again and eat, and then, they would talk and discuss whatever was going on. And we weren't allowed to interfere with that. They wanted that time alone, and I'd say that time on a regular day, say like in winter, it was 5 o'clock till maybe 7 o'clock. That they would talk, and then after 7 my dad would talk to us and stuff, and then we'd go to bed and it was another new day. So anyway, that's pretty much how life was at that point, up until I was about 16. And somewhere in there I had started working, I was 12 years old I believe, working at Howard Johnson's, scooping ice cream and stuff, and I used to pay room and board to my mom and dad, but they would have me pay, I think something like, when I think about it now, I'm thinking in terms of percentages, like 20% of whatever I earned. So if I got, $10, I'd have to give them, so much money. And pretty much that's about how it worked. Now, after I turned 16, and I could get a full-time job, especially in summertime, then they expected a little more than that. Not like a whole lot more, but they expected more repetition in paying throughout the summertime. And it wasn't so much that I felt that they were ripping me off. I never felt that because I ate good at home and my mom always had our laundry and stuff done. There was no time when I got up and didn't have clothes to go to work in or something. That would have been ridiculous. My mom never did that. Also, she packed us lunches. I got to tell you that the lunches she would pack, I think, kind of were a little shy here and there, but that's just the way they were. They were like that even, between themselves. So, but I have no complaints. I really don't. I mean, I loved being at home. I had a good family life, and I loved my mom and dad very much, and still do to this day. Even though there might have been things that we argued about, and there were things. So then anyway, after I turned 16 years old, and I started working, I found life to be better, because once I got to be 16, I got a car. First I had a motorcycle, and I used that to get back and forth to work. And then I had a car, and then there came a time when while I was 16, where I stopped working wherever I was working. I don't even remember where I was working, but then I started working for my dad, because my dad had this construction business. So when I started working for him, it was like, in the truck on the way to work, this was Dad. When we got to work, I didn't know this man. This man would tell me things and say things to me that I didn't think he ever said. And this is where I learned that he cursed, or he said things to straighten people out or argued with inspectors or whatever had to be done on the job site. That's what was going on. Me, I was just a laborer. I worked in a 20-foot deep ditch, 22-foot deep, I think the cut was, laying sewer pipe. And that's what I did when I was 16, 17 years old. I remember doing it when I was, actually I did it in the summer of 15. I went to work with him in the summer, and I laid pipe when I was 15 years old at a place in Bethlehem, PA, and the ditch, like I say, was 22 feet deep. We were laying 8-inch sanitary sewer pipe. I loved it. I loved the work. I couldn't get enough of it. And my dad was very cautious about things like nobody ever got buried, there were no cave-ins, there was nothing like that. You know, he made sure that there were street signs up, that people had a place to drive by, walk by, or whatever. Things, he took care of stuff like that. So there were never any problems on his particular site that he was taking care of. Now, some of the other sites that there were, you had to be afraid because some of the people that worked there, even though they were foremen and they were much older than me, they were not trustworthy. They didn't really watch the ditch. They didn't know how dirt acts. You know, they didn't know what water really does to dirt. Really, they had confusion over that, so, and as silly as it sounds, but and I could get into that a lot deeper, but I'm just saying. So then being with my dad, I learned all about that stuff, and once I was driving, and the funny part is I remember driving to work with him, but now that I think about it, once I got my own driver's license, I drove myself to work in my own car. He did not take me to work. He didn't want me to be in the truck with him. He just wanted to go by himself. And I think it's because when he left home, he had to become someone else. Because my dad was very nice to talk to. You could talk to him all day long. He was nice to talk to. But man, when I saw him on the job site, was he different? He was totally different. So, you know, that's just something I'm talking with discipline here. So then, the things like being to work on time, you know, putting the right hours down, actually getting work done, you know, he would question me about that stuff, and he didn't question me about other people, he questioned them. But he questioned me about what did I do, you know, what was happening, this or that, especially when we worked overtime. Because I used to work overtime every night and he'd go home. And so would another guy, we'd string pipe or, you know, do whatever we had to do at the time. And it was good money. I was making good money. I remember, oh boy, I think at that time, when I was 16, I was probably making like $5 an hour, which at that time, I gotta tell you, when you were working 60-hour weeks, you were making $300 a week. This is back in the early 1970s. As a single kid, I was doing fine. I didn't have any problems at all. But so anyway, if we did have anything go wrong, it was never anything that would happen at work. It would have been stuff that actually happened at home. Like, no matter how old I was when I was at home, and I left home pretty young, but when I was at home, I had to be in the house by 10 o'clock on a weekend. It did not matter who I was with or where I was. In fact, when I had my own car, I never remember my parents ever telling me, you can't go somewhere. I could go anywhere I wanted to go. I could do whatever I wanted to do, as long as I didn't bring them any trouble home, or anything happened, they didn't have problems with it. But on a weekend, I had to be in at 10 o'clock, and during the week, 9 o'clock. That's because my dad pretty much went to bed at those hours, and he wanted me home before he went to bed. So anyway, that's how it was, and I didn't have a problem with it. I mean, now when I remember my oldest kid, when he was 16 years old, he got his driver's license. He came home one night, 4 o'clock in the frickin' morning. I don't want to tell you what that was like because I didn't take that. But I'm just saying, you know, there's a difference there. I never thought to disobey the thing, be in at 10 o'clock. Okay, that's the rule. I'll do it. I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't have to be out. And, you know, I had a girlfriend and stuff and different things, so, but it never was a problem to do what they asked me to do. I still had to take care of the garbage, I still shoveled snow and, you know, stuff like that. So, that's how it was after I turned 16. So, after, let's see, the way my father dealt with me, like I said, he gave me lickings when I was real young. When I was over 16, I think he slapped me in the mouth twice for something, and believe it or not, I actually did not do, I remember this, I didn't do what he thought I did. And he got the word from my mom, and what happened was, I had come in the house, and the both of them were watching television, but they were asleep. They had both fallen asleep. And when I came in the house, it was, you know, 5 or 10 or something like that. But when I got in the house, I'm sitting there and I was watching what they were watching, and it was 20 after 10, and all of a sudden my mom woke up. Well, I didn't have my shoes on, I sure as heck didn't have my coat on, and my mom assumed that I just came in. That's what, you know, that she woke up hearing me come in. And that wasn't true, and I remember my dad slapping me in the mouth until I finally said, yes, I came in late. But I never did come in late. I just wanted him to stop hitting me. So, and I don't know if I ever told him about that. I think I may have. And I think my dad's response would have been, after telling him that, would have probably been something like, oh well, once out of all the times I had to give you a spanking, you know, which was a wrong one, isn't that bad. And that's how we left it. And I mean, I never forgot it, because it's the first time he ever hit me for not doing something. You know, I mean, for not being guilty of the crime, whatever it was. But anyway, and after that, there was no, I mean, we had some arguments about things maybe on the job or whatever, but he never hit me, never even made an attempt to hit me, never indicated that he would want to hit me. And he would be mad about something, but he would come out of his mouth, he would not hit me after, you know, this certain age. And believe me, I had a great deal of respect for my dad. I would never hit my father. I don't give a shit what he did to me. He could slap me all he wanted, and he could be as wrong as could be, and I would never think to hit my father, because I loved him. That's all there is to it. But the other part of that is, like with my kids, none of my kids ever hit me. I can say that, and I don't think they would. And why they wouldn't, that's their thing. I don't really know for sure, but you know, I just know they never did, and I'm glad they didn't. But so that's the kind of discipline I sort of had. Now, you know, we're talking about quite a few years there in a short time. But what I can tell you, the things that were mainly said to me by my dad or my mother, and you know, to keep you in line, was stuff like, you got to be to work on time, you got to have lunch, you got to have your car running good. So I mostly spent weekends fixing my car, or making sure my car was in good shape to get to work. And getting to work and doing the job, and you know, being honest about your hours and how much work we did and what work we actually did, that was the name of the game. There was nothing else going on. You know, we didn't have a phone in our pocket and we could know every single thing that someone else was doing in their life. I used to put a sandwich in my pocket. I sure as heck didn't have no telephone. And I think it was better then. You know, my mom would say to my dad, and my dad wasn't a food shopper, my mom was the food shopper, but my mom would say to my dad something like, you know, the furnace is acting up, and maybe he'd stop and get a furnace filter or whatever it needed. And he'd stop on the way home, pick that up. You got to remember, I was eating breakfast when my dad was eating breakfast, but I had to leave a little earlier because I had to be at work a little bit before time because I used to start the heavy equipment. But the thing is they would talk about what they needed and they never talked again all day. So I don't see a reason why we need to have cell phones. You know, this cell phone thing has become crazy. I mean, it's one thing if it's a mistake, but it's gotten to the point where our children are on the phone constantly. And even though they think that they're protecting their young by being on the phone, I got to tell you that that's not true. Because the young are not telling them exactly what's going on. And because they're not there with them, they don't really know the truth. So it's kind of frustrating when you think about this. And what I'm getting at is, to us, we didn't need cell phones because we could remember what to do before we came back home. Seems like today people can't, no matter what age they are. It seems like they've forgotten, you know, how and why they should do things. So anyway, guys, that's the name of this story. So have a good one, and I pray I get a little more than an inch of snow. I need enough to at least plow to give me something, you know, that feels like I've actually worked. Have a good one.